In today's show, we're diving deep on the Trailblazers rebuild, talking patience, the path, and what work is still left to be done. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? Is your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're diving deep, we're getting a little theoretical, and we'll even get into the history books a little bit, a sort of deeper, more philosophical look at rebuilding. I want to talk about the Blazers' path forward, the sort of patience required for a team that is where they are. I want to look at how other teams have pulled themselves out of similar situations and what we regard as successful rebuilds. And then I want to talk about the work still left to be done, because that is the real question for the Blazers. Not kind of where they are, but where the heck are they going? That's what we'll do to close the show. But I want to talk about sort of where they stand in the sort of present tense. And I want to talk about it in more theoretical terms. There is this idea. Let's start here. There was an idea floated to me that I shared with you, dear listeners, on the podcast. This is a long-time listener to the program, Dr. J. Shout out to you, Dr. J. Hope you're doing well out there. But Dr. J shared this with me maybe about early fall, like right at the start of this, right before the season kicked off, roughly, or maybe it was this summer. But prior to the games being played this year, that this wasn't actually year one of a rebuild, but this was you could view it as year three of the rebuild, because they tanked to. They made the big trades, and then they tanked to get Shaedon Sharpe, and then they made some other moves, and then they tanked again to get Scoot, and now they're moving forward after they've traded after they've traded Damian Lillard, and now they're launching year three of the rebuild. And it's like 2 bad years where they finished with top 7 picks in the draft. So those were actually the two first years of the rebuild, and now this is the soft launch of year 3 of a rebuild. And I kind of teased it out and talk through that idea, and I think I've seen other people run with it, not crediting Dr. J, who I believe originated the idea, but the podcast has reach, and I appreciate it. But I think it's pretty clear where the Blazers are now, that this is not year 3 of rebuild. This is those first 2 years were the tear down portion. That's to get to the studs, and now they're building back up. And building back up has had some challenges. They're a bad basketball team. They're 15-42. And this season has been challenging, right? Because of injuries that derailed some of their sort of larger plans, with Rob Williams at the beginning of the season. Shaedon Sharpe's going to end up playing, 35 games this year. Scoot Henderson is out for an extended period of time now. You're not getting Malcolm Brogdon in the back half of the season, even to see like, hey, this is an interesting vet that maybe can be part of whatever's next. Now DeAndre Ayton is injured. It's like they're beat up and they're bad. And when you combine those two things, like, hey, this season has been choppy because of the inconsistency and all the injuries, and they were already going to be bad, right? Like if they were fully healthy, what do they win? Like generously, like 7 more games. Let's call it 10 more games, right? Let's be as generous as possible. It'd be 25 and 33, 25 and 32. They'd be like still out of the play-in, maybe on the edge of the play-in, but like not a particularly good team. I think 10 more wins is really generous from my perspective, but that's neither here nor there. So now it's this point in the season where it's trying to be a Blazer fan. It's tough. It is a trying time. And I commend you if you're listening to this program. Like I sincerely appreciate the support, and also like you're a sicko. You love this team. or at least you love to hate this team or something. Like what you have is this deep emotional connection for better or for worse. That's what the fun part about sports are, the emotional connections we develop with the teams that we like. I've said before in this program that I don't really consider myself a Blazers fan, and I really don't, because I don't have a deep emotional connection with the team. I have a deep emotional connection with the Tar Heels, the North Carolina Tar Heels. Carolina basketball can make me sad, it can make me mad, can make me extremely happy. I really love the NBA. I spent a lot of time thinking about the Portland Trail Blazers, as evidenced by the 250 podcasts I put out a year about the team. I still have plenty of fun watching high-level basketball, and attending Blazer games is still a great joy, but like, the emotional connection isn't there for me. But I say that not to like brag as some sort of like holier than thou media member. I say that as to respect what it means to care about a team. To care about a team means to develop an emotional connection. It's entertainment. And there are these sort of pragmatic fans, pragmatic folks around the league, even some media members, who really think like losing is actually this virtuous task because you're collecting assets and building up your draft stock, and you will move forward with all of these things. And actually, this is good, friend. And I think there is some obvious logic to that. But like, losing is hard. If you like something, watching them lose is hard. The pragmatist may be correct, but that doesn't change your emotional connection to something. And this is a challenge. And so then you get to this point where it's like, you need to be patient with this team because they're young and they're rebuilding. And this is year one of a rebuild pretty clearly after 2 years of a teardown. And then you're left with this question of whether patience is virtuous or arduous. Is patience a virtue, or is patience fool's gold that they hawk to someone who roots for laundry? Because you know what patience does? If you buy into patience, teams can keep selling it to you. It has an endless supply of requesting your patience, an endless supply. But it's also probably a necessity, even if it's unfun, and even if it's ugly, and even if it's like, and I think this is the most damning part of the Blazers season, boring. Even if it's boring. But that's where they are. And why I want to talk about this in theories, because what I want to kind of launch into in today's show is like, I want to look at some other rebuilds around the league. And we've done this in the past, but I want to revisit them and talk about how they've gone from being truly stinky bottom of the garbage pile to something else, and then kind of look at a couple different paths of teams, 3 different teams, and how they have pulled out of it. Because the Blazers are here. And they're not going to be a good basketball team next year. I'm certain of a couple things. One, no matter what happens this summer, they're going to talk about at Media Day how they finally got players that fit Chauncey Billups' style of play. I will lose my mind on the show when they say that, but I know they're going to say it. They finally got players that fit Chauncey Billups' style of play. They've been telling us that a lot. We've had a lot of that, but what they have not done the last couple of years is promise to be good. They've promised to be 1 year the most connected team, and 1 year a team that, really that is committed to finding what works and doing things the right way. Is kind of the message was this year. We're gonna do the things the right way. But they haven't promised to be good. And you could just look at the roster and look at the level of talent and know that they're not going to be very good next year. Better? Sure. There's hope that there's some real internal improvement, and Shane Sharp makes a leap, and Scoot Henderson is not like one of the worst players in the league for 35 games to begin the season like he was this year, and all that. And you get the good version of DeAndre Ayton for more games and everything, right? There's improvement might be there, but like good, the West is too stacked. Some teams are going to get old, some teams are going to get worse, but like the West is just too stacked to expect the Blazers to be like, I think they'll finish 5th next year. It's wacky to do that, in my opinion. So if you're looking out on the horizon and you're like, they're going to stink again, you need to be one of 2 things: patient or check the heck out. And I guess the third thing is like this cold, dead pragmatist who says like, I will strap in to watch 82 games because 2 years of losing is actually great and it builds character. And that's the people who think patience is a virtue and that suffering is a reward. And those people might just be Buddhists, and I support their cause, and I think their approach is actually really will end to the sort of cessation of suffering at some points. But come on now. You can admit something's not fun. Patience is necessary, and also it stinks. So let's look at how some other teams have taken that path and what patience might look like, and then we'll bring it back to the Blazers to close the show and kind of see what patience has looked like for a couple different teams. Before we do that, I want to tell you, dear listener, about eBay Motors. My friend Josh Lloyd, the host of Locked On Fantasy Basketball, has teamed up with our partners over at eBay Motors to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for daily fantasy or you're getting down to it in the playoff run of your season-long fantasy team, Josh is going to be here to provide you with players guaranteed to fit your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for us in this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. A name you know. Right here at the top of the list, Duop Reith is a name that Josh thinks could be worth keeping an eye on. Here's what we know about DeAndre Ayton right now. He fell on his hand. It looked like it hurt. He got x-rays. They were negative, so he doesn't have a broken bone in his hand. But he did not play in the second half. He's listed out. He was ruled out with a right hand sprain. Blazers have not provided an official update, but it didn't look good, and he didn't play. And it is truly unknown heading into a 3-game road trip. And I think this is the point Josh makes here, if DeAndre Ayton is going to miss an extended period of time, Duop Reith is the player who's going to benefit the most. And Reith has shown when he plays big minutes, he's not going to be like a 25-point per game monster, but he's going to be productive. He's a good offensive rebounder. He shoots threes. He can block shots when he's kind of standing in one place and can like stand right at the rim and be big. He is an opportunity if DeAndre Ayton were to miss a lot of time or even just a little bit of time and you need someone for the weekends, Reith would stand to benefit and play a big minute role if Ayton is out. We will see. No broken bones is a really good sign, but no official timeline yet, which either means that he'll miss one game or all of the games forever, because you never know with how the Blazers handle injuries. Josh Lloyd over Locked On Fantasy Basketball. He's going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your car stays running smoothly. Whether you need brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, baby, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right. So we talked in sort of big theoretical terms about patience and the types of fans they are and the Blazers where they are. They're gonna demand your patience because they're probably in this for a little bit. So what I want to do here in the second segment is talk about some teams that have been in it and how they got out of it and what that looks like. The 3 teams I want to highlight here are the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Sacramento Kings, and the Houston Rockets. If you're an everyday listener, you know that I have kind of circled these teams as different types of paths because they have taken, they're teams that have taken different routes and find themselves in varying degrees of success as they pull out of those routes, as they navigate out of those routes, I guess, because you're still on the route. The Thunder is the one everyone wants to point to. Basically impossible to duplicate. In specific terms, you're not going to duplicate what the Thunder did. Damian Lillard exploded the franchise in 2019. He waved bye-bye. Exploded the franchise. Trade Paul George. Trade Russell Westbrook. See ya. Detonated from 37 feet out. Incredible moment. Talk about getting some joy from a Blazer game. Incredible moment. Very lucky to be in the gym. But the pivot included getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and 5 first-round picks from the Clippers. It included getting Chris Paul from the Houston Rockets, and it included being just a straight-up good basketball team the following season. That's the bubble year, and that team won 44 games, made the playoffs with Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder and Danilo Gallinari and a young SGA. And then the following year, they really blew it up. That's when they started to go truly young. That's the 2020-2021 year, the season that started in December. They won 22 games that year, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played 35 games of a 72-game season, half the season. But he averaged 23.7 points. He averaged 24 points per game. He was very clearly about to be Timothée Chalamet, Himi Neutron, whoever you want to be, Him Hinson. He was clearly very good. Not as good as he is now, but he was clearly very good. And that allowed them the freedom of patience, because they had the building block and they had 1 million draft picks. They didn't need to continue to move assets around. They were able to, move on from Chris Paul, and they were able to, continue to make moves, but they had it with SGA, and they had the picks. So they were given this. The way they exited the previous iteration of the team, while they spent the following years, they go 22-50 that year. SGA is awesome. The following year they go 24-58. SGA plays 56 games, and they go. He averages 25 a game. They draft Josh Giddey. He's clearly at least an NBA starter or NBA rotation player. The following season, or in the 2022 draft, the following summer, they get 2 of the 3 best players in the draft in the 22 draft class, Chet Holmgren and J-Dub and Jalen Williams. They just nail a draft so incredibly hard. Chet Holmgren looks like he's going to be a multi-time All-Star. Jalen Williams, the only reason I won't say he's going to be an All-Star is because there's just not enough spots in the West for that many All-Stars. But he is supremely talented. In year 2, he's just freaking good. You nail those draft picks. The following year, or that year, as Chet doesn't play, but SGA continues to rise. J-Dub is already really good. They go 40-42. They finish in 10th. They win a play-in game, but they don't make the playoffs. Now they're 41-17. They're freaking great. They're could conceivably make the Western Conference Finals. They could conceivably win the title. I wouldn't pick them to win the title because I think there's some truth to have to be there. And they haven't even played a playoff series yet, so I think if they had played one playoff series, maybe I'd be pretty bullish on them, because I think they're really good, right? They're really good. They're maybe not big enough to handle the Nuggets, but also they've handled them okay. They're pretty good. Can you duplicate that? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's unduplicatable. How are you gonna trade Paul George for 5 draft picks? You couldn't even do it again, because you weren't just trading for Paul George. You were trading for the rights to also sign Kawhi Leonard. It was a whole perfect storm. They capitalized on it. It launched the rebuild. But even then, they spent 2 years bad, 22 wins and 24 wins. Last year missing the playoffs, and now they're in just 4 seasons removed, right? From the teardown from in 2019, a year where they were good with weird vets, and then they pivoted. So 5 years since the 2019 season. In 5 seasons, they're a juggernaut. They look like they're going to be good forever. And that's not how it works in the NBA. Your window's always short, but it looks like they're going to be good for an extended period of time. The next team I want to look at is the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings were bad forever. I don't think you can repeat what OKC did. I think, unfortunately, you can repeat what the Kings did. They're bad forever. Half the league makes the playoffs. More than half the team in each conference makes the playoffs. The Kings didn't make the playoffs for 16 seasons. From 2006 to 2023, they didn't make the playoffs. Oh no. Terrible ownership, incredibly bad mismanagement, terrible drafting, some terrible signees along the way. Every one they could miss, they missed in the sort of in that middle 2000s, first decade of the 2000s stretch. Jimmer Fredette over CJ McCollum, Thomas Robinson over Damian Lillard, to name a couple. And they just did it wrong. In 2017, they drafted De'Aaron Fox. He didn't make the playoffs until 2023, year 6. He was great that year. All-NBA, All-Star, incredible, but 6 years after they drafted a cornerstone, right? That takes a lot of patience. That's what I'm talking about. It's repeatable. You can do that. You can draft a player that's good, continue to invest in them, and continue to build around them. But you're going to have to survive some missteps. The Kings were able to do that. And then in the 21-22 season, they weren't very good. They had, they'd only won the most games they had won since 2006 when they made the playoffs. Following that they won 38 games. They had never won a 39th game since 2000, the 07-08 season. Like, just a lot of years of stink. But they go 30-52 in the 21-22 season. That's the last year of Luke Walton. At the trade deadline that year, they make the big trade. They've drafted Tyrese Halliburton. He looks like he's going to be a special player, but he's a weird fit with De'Aaron Fox because he's also a point guard, and it's like, huh. And they make the bold choice, right? They make the bold choice of trading the younger guy and not the older guy, and they trade for an established all-star. They say, De'Aaron Fox, we know what he is. We don't know what Tyrese Halliburton can be, but people bet on, and by letting another team bet on his success, we can, bet on his potential, we can get better. They trade Halliburton to the Pacers. They get Domantas Sabonis. He makes an all-star team. They go 48-34 last year. But also that summer, they trade for Kevin Huerter. They trade for Harrison Barnes. They trade for Trey Lyles. They sign Malik Monk. They draft Keegan Murray. And they built this 48-win team that's like, oh, this team's good. Like, they're just like legitimately good. Now they're back. They're 33-24. They're like, right in that play-in, avoid the play-in range. It's kind of, it's up there. Like, I think the Kings could conceivably climb like to 5th, but also they could drop to 10th. Like, but they're in the mix yet again, and they're good yet again. Here's the problem. How much better can the Kings get? Depends on how good Keegan Murray can be. If Keegan Murray ends up being excellent, they can get very, very good. If he doesn't, they're a little bit stuck because their roster's expensive and they don't have a bunch of tradable parts. And it is very real that some teams get caught being pretty good. They don't get enough chance. That's like the Damian Lillard Blazers. They were pretty good for a long time. One year they won 53 games and made the Western Conference Finals. It's a freaking great season, but they never had a slice of that championship equity. They never had a slice of the pie. And I think the Kings find themselves in a very similar situation. That's a very successful rebuild. 16 years of stink. You nail a draft pick. You trade that draft pick for an all-star. You build a really good team, a really fun and rewarding team. Ask any Kings fan. Last year's as rewarding as it gets. They're good again this year. Out of the rebuild. It took almost 20 years of patience, but when they kind of got it right, they've settled in on being a competitive team probably for, a 3, 4, 5 year window. Perhaps longer depending on how good Keegan Murray is. That seems repeatable. That seems doable. That seems like something you could do again. But the Blazers maybe don't want to do that. They want to be this last team. It's been reported by a couple different places. Brian Windhorst of ESPN, and where I first heard it was Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports, said the Blazers kind of have their eyes on being the Houston Rockets. Interesting. What does that look like? Let's talk about that to close the show and talk about the rest of the work that needs to be done for the Portland Trail Blazers to even get that far. But before we do that, I want to tell you all about Grammarly. Do you need to write at your job? Well, no matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is key. So whether you're writing just emails in your day-to-day, or you're writing up big reports, or you're putting together presentations, all of that is equally important, and collaboration is needed to get things done. And Grammarly can help you get started and help you collaborate. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work. You can save time with one click and go from editing that takes hours to seconds. 93% of professionals using Grammarly Premium support report that it helps them get more work done. Grammarly is over a decade, 14 years of experience. started with a program that was just basically a grammar check add-on, right? It was like you could add it to your web browser and you could click on it and it would say, hey, you got a typo in this sentence. Now, after 14 years, they are the gold standard of responsible AI with just about every IT certification under the sun. It's the secure AI writing partner that helps your team make their point and move faster. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. OKC's path is hard to duplicate. King's path, think you can duplicate it, but it shows the pitfalls. You can spend a long time in the desert. And then when you get it right, you are forced to take a big risk. And that big risk can get you back to the middle in a hurry, and then it's really hard to move from there. Then you got to get all the stuff right around the margins. The Kings have basically 2 all-star level players on their team. They're really good. They're really good. And yet they're outside of the true inner circle of contenders. OKC, I would assume they're also still on the outside of a true inner circle of contenders, but they look like they could get there, and they've just been outrageously good this year, so I don't want to dismiss them outright. But the team that has reported the sort of the Blazers kind of, I don't know, fancy themselves. I kind of think they just prefer the reporting from Brian Windhorst and Jake Fisher of ESPN says the Blazers kind of they view next year's team as they'd rather be the Rockets, which to me means that they would rather have veterans on the roster. They'd rather have veterans on the roster because they don't want to necessarily just hand over the reins to the youngsters and be objectively terrible. But like what it really reads as is like they're comfortable not trading Malcolm Brogdon and Jeremy Grant. More on that in a moment. But following Houston Rockets' path is going to be a challenge, even in and of itself. The Rockets, it's to begin that 2021 season. That's the season that started in December. They traded Harden like 8 games into the year, but they went 17-55. They're terrible. Following year, they draft Jalen Green. They draft Alperen Sengun at 14. They go 20-62 that year. The next year after that, they're back in the top 5. They draft Jabari Smith Jr. and they draft Tari Eason later in the lottery. They go 22-60. So they're back in the lottery again this year. They end up 4th. They get Amen Thompson, and then at the 20th pick they get Cam Whitmore. This is a team that's trade away Russell Westbrook for stuff, trade away James Harden for stuff. They had picks, a bunch of picks. What is that? 6 top 20 picks across 3 seasons. And whether all 6 of those guys pan out, it seems like Jalen Green might be the odd man out there, and Tari Eason's been injured a bunch this year, but he's been good when he plays. Like, they got a good young core. And then they signed this summer some vets. Fred VanVleet got a big contract. Dylan Brooks got a big contract. They added Jeff Green to the core. Like, that's kind of balancing veterans who are going to play ahead of and playing them alongside and maybe ahead of some youngsters. They're 25-33 this season. That's the 10 extra wins we give the Trailblazers if they had just been healthy. I don't think they're winning 10 extra games, but that's the 10 extra wins. They also hired Ime Udoka this summer. That's a huge addition. They're an elite defensive team under Udoka this season, and that's even playing Alperen Sengun as their best player and their centerpiece. And Sengun looks like a dude who should always be getting barbecued on defense. The way he moves, the way he runs up the court, his just like lateral quickness. But they've built a really good defense. I mean, Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks are really good defensive players. That helps. Amen Thompson's a good defensive player as a youngster. That helps. But like, they have they have like someone who should be an obvious wink and like, impossible to build a good defense with Sengun, like a non-rim protector, slow center. Well, guess what? They're the 6th best defense in the league. Like, they're freaking good. But they're 12th. They're the 12th best team in the West. They're out of the play-in. They're still probably searching for that foundational piece. Whereas OKC has Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and have Chet Holmgren and J-Dub, and they've got a trio that's really good. And the Kings have De'Aaron Fox, an all-star, and Sabonis, an all-star. Neither of them made it this year, but it's not a lot of spots, But like they each made it in the past seasons, all NBA seasons a season ago. Like they're very good players. Houston doesn't have that. They got a bunch of good players, a bunch of intriguing young players, but they don't have that. And I think that's the challenge, and that's kind of why I am skeptical of the Blazers wanting to be Houston. How do you build forward? Like, Alperen Şengün is really good. He's better than any player on the Blazers roster. He's really good. And Fred VanVleet might be better than any player on the Blazers roster. Like, but even then, those dudes are short of like tier 1 stars that you can build a foundation on moving forward and like compete for where you want to go. I think one of the interesting things about kind of thinking about this is like, what do we consider a success, right? The Rockets are pretty clearly not a success yet, but they've got a lot of parts and they're located in the 4th largest city in America, and they have a history in Houston of attracting talent there, right? Like Houston is uniquely positioned to add stars in a way that other cities aren't. And they could cash in a bunch of these youngsters and some of the picks they have and probably trade for a star better than a lot of teams in the league. They're positioned to make that move, but they still need that move to get where they want to go. Houston is short of it and still a move away, which is why I'm skeptical of the Blazers following that path. There is work left to do for the Blazers, and I think that's the frustrating part of the season for me. Is that if they want to pursue this Rockets path, like that would be a distinct improvement. You hire a really stinking good coach. You continue to stack, more young players. Blazers have 2 draft picks again in this draft. This would kind of be a similar rhythm to what the Rockets have the last 3 seasons post Harden. You hold on to your vets around. Like I think Dylan Brooks is probably more impactful than Jeremy Grant just because he's so good on defense. But it's like, that might be personal preference because Brooks can be pretty destructive on offense as well. But like, even if you follow that path and you hold on to your vets and there's still work to be done. I think the frustrating part about this season for me for the Blazers is that they've punted on the decisions for the future. And one of the reasons they probably punted on the decisions for the future is because the trades out there that could have been made and that they were interested in making just didn't have great returns. And they said, why would we chase a bad return now? We have the benefit of patience because we don't need to rush. But not needing to rush is not the same as not needing to make a decision. And I think that's the challenge. The Blazers don't need to rush, but this summer they're going to need to make big decisions. One of the 4 guards and probably one of either Malcolm Brogdon or Anthony Simons needs to be traded before next season. They need to add more help in the front court, both at the center spot, and they need more viable forwards who can play in the league. Whether they add those via, like they're just not going to be a player in free agency the way Houston is. It's hard to duplicate it. So they're going to get better via the trade market and via the draft. And because they didn't make any moves in season beyond adding Delano Banton, who's fun, but like not that type of player, they just have so many big decisions ahead of them. Massive ones. They don't have the same pull as the city of Houston in NBA circles. It's just Portland ain't that. So they can't follow it to a T, but they could follow the spirit of it. Young players around veterans and you move forward. But if you do that, you are not OKC and Sacramento. You are a team that's 25-33 and is still waiting to take the next big swing to jump back up into we are a legitimate playoff team. We are a legitimate team that could win a playoff series. I think a rebuild is successful. Not when you win a championship, right? Because that is a stupid way to judge basketball teams. And people who say like, oh, they never won a title, so it doesn't matter. It's just like, learn to enjoy something, weirdo. But I think a rebuild can be successful when you can go into a playoff series and say, we can win this. In the West, it's loaded. So to go into a playoff series and say we can win this, you probably can't finish 7th or 8th, right? You have to finish 6th or above, and you have to either go win on the road or earn home court advantage during the regular season so you feel good about starting at home and say we can win this. Doesn't mean you have to win it. Like I think the Kings rebuild has been successful because they could go into a playoff series this year and talk themselves into winning it. They could have won a playoff series last year. They just lost in Game 7. The Rockets aren't there yet. They're not even a playoff team, much less a team that can talk themselves into winning a playoff series. And the Blazers are behind Houston in terms of asset collection and appeal as a market. And I think that's where the patience comes in. It is both arduous and necessary. Root for this team because you love this team, because you have an emotional connection, because sports is entertainment, and that's what you love, is that you develop an emotional connection and you are entertained by it. If you need to check out because this is too much losing and too boring and all of those things, by all means, check out. I'll be here when you get back. I mean, maybe stay subscribed or whatever, but like, I'll be here when you get back. But patience is, you are going to be asked, nay, demanded of you that you be patient with the Blazers. Because if you look at those 3 teams I highlighted here, Portland is behind 2 of them a great deal, and maybe a step behind Houston. And a step behind Houston is still a step away from the next thing, from building a playoff level roster. That means it's going to take more patience. It's going to take more time, and it might be another full season of this. And that is hard to stomach, in part because they've delayed some of the big decisions they have to make. We'll talk about those big decisions more moving forward because they are the fascinating part to me. When do they make the big decisions, and what do they do? Because I think it's pretty clear that Anthony Simons is not like a foundational building block. I think he's established that this year, that he just can't be. But it's really challenging to say we choose Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe. Shaedon Sharpe basically a full lost season. Scoot Henderson mostly bad to begin his rookie year with some promise lately. But to choose them over Ant might be reasonable, but that's a big decision, right? That's a big decision to make. I'm ready for the Blazers to make those big decisions. I'm ready for them to choose a direction, to pick a path. I'm ready for them to reward your patience with a little more victorious basketball. But I want to recognize right now that might be many, many, many games away. We might be talking 150 more basketball games. If you count the rest of this season, more like 190. Patience is going to be required unless you opt out. But if you can find that emotional connection, you can find the spirit, you can find the enjoyment, the adding parts along the way and the decisions they make can be enjoyable. And I will do my best to help sort of shepherd along your enjoyment of those decisions, the minutia, the big things, the little things, and all of it in between. Tell your friends about the podcast. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.